Good to see some familiar faces and some new faces at what I think is a very important meeting. And I always, when I introduce a meeting, I always feel the need to spend a couple of minutes justifying why we're having the meeting and explaining what the purpose of holding this meeting is. And today is no exception, to be honest. I won't lie, a few people have come up to me and said, well, what on earth have Ferguson, Missouri and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea got to do with one another? And on the one hand, I think, well, you know, okay, fair question. On the other hand, I kind of think, well, if this was 30, 40 years ago, if this was the height of the frontline struggle, if this was the 1960s or 1970s, when the concept of anti-imperialism, the concept of global unity, the idea that solidarity is indivisible actually meant something and was part of our movement, then would you be asking me that question? And that thought perhaps gives a clue as to why we're having a meeting like this, because we want to get back to that situation. The whole purpose of this meeting, the whole purpose, like the whole political raison d'etre of the organisers of this meeting and of the Tricontinental Anti-Imperialist Platform is about building global unity, about building global solidarity. Because, you know, there's some clear differences between the struggles that are going on in Ferguson, Missouri and in People's Korea. But also there's some clear similarities. I mean, at the end of the day, who is it that thinks that they can shoot down black teenagers in the streets of Missouri and the United States with impunity? It is the armed state forces of US imperialism. Who is it that thinks they can threaten North Korea with a military attack, with total annihilation? Who is it that thinks they can demonize North Korea in a highly racist and brutal way and sanction North Korea? It is the armed state forces of US imperialism. What force is it that occupies the streets and cities of Missouri and North America? It's US imperialism. What force is it that that occupies the southern part of the Korean peninsula and has done since 1945? That's right, it's US imperialism. So there's some very important solidarities between the struggles in North Korea and in the United States and the Black Liberation Movement, and we feel our role is to try and help in rebuilding that unity and in joining the dots between different struggles that are going on in the world. Because ultimately, they are very good, the enemy is very good at uniting. We're not so good at uniting. The enemy is extremely good at uniting. We could take a lesson out of their book. Do you think, for example, that British imperialism and US imperialism have an exact unity of interests? Do you think that they're one and the same thing? They're not one and the same thing. There are some very important differences between them, but when they need to, they close ranks. For example, in 1950, when the US decided to go to full-scale war against the people of Korea, Britain joined in. The British government, the supposed left, red, socialist Labour government of Clement Attlee, that we all celebrate as, you know, when we look back fondly on the spirit of 45, yeah, they created the NHS, but they also engaged in imperialist, colonialist war. So when they need to unite, they unite. So we need to unite. Let's us unite too. And the other thing that's interesting about Ferguson and Korea, what makes Ferguson so special is not the fact that a black teenager, Michael Brown, got shot. Unfortunately, that's something that happens very frequently. That's an almost daily event in the United States of America, this great democracy. What's different and what's special is that it's the straw that's broken the camel's back and it's caused the people to stand up, and there is a level of uprising and resistance that we have not seen in that country for a long time, and it's opened up possibilities that I think is fair to say we probably haven't seen in decades in North America, and that's a very profound thing. Meanwhile, in People's Korea, they're also standing up. They're also resisting. Don't think for a second that imperialism doesn't want to wipe out North Korea, that it doesn't want to do to the Democratic People's Republic of Korea what it's done to Libya, what it's done to Iraq, what it's done to Afghanistan, what it's done to Yugoslavia. They want to do that, and the only reason they haven't been able to do that is that North Korea knows how to defend itself. It gets criticized for the amount of investment and energy that it's put into its self-defense capacity and into developing nuclear weapons capacity. But if it weren't for those things, North Korea would be leveled. Pyongyang would be rubble. They turned it to rubble in 1950, and they would happily do it again if they thought they could get away with it, and if the North Korean people and state were not resisting, which they are resisting. And there's another reason for putting the two things, Ferguson and DPRK, together, I suppose, which is that I think it's fair to say that Ferguson is a relatively popular, relatively, I don't want to say fashionable because that demeans it, but it's uncontroversial in radical or left or progressive circles to say we stand with the people of Ferguson. I mean, of course we do. Who thinks it's right that police think that they can kill black teenagers in the United States with impunity? Nobody in their right mind thinks that that's a correct or a good thing. Of course we stand for equality. Of course we stand for the most fundamental human rights of African peoples, Latin peoples, indigenous peoples in North America. But the DPRK People's Career is a more controversial issue. People fight, if they do support it, they tend to be a little bit more sheepish about it, a little bit more reticent about it, a bit more quiet about it. And perhaps that's, all the propaganda and the crazy racist demonization getting through to people. And perhaps there's an element of, I call it neo-McCarthyism to it as well, because the way the press treats Korea, if you have any feelings of sympathy or solidarity whatsoever with the peoples of Korea, you're some kind of nutcase. Probably a few of you saw a recent article in the Daily Mail. I think a few people have shared it on social media, about a woman called Leslie Larkham, Leslie Larkham, who's a teacher in South London, a quite prestigious school called Dulwich College. She's not a history teacher, she's not a politics teacher, she's not a sociology teacher, she's not an international relations teacher, she's a music teacher, she's the head of strings. And the Daily Mail have got this massive full-page expose on her, that she is someone who sympathises with DPRK. And the whole line of the article is basically, we think that the parents of this school wouldn't like to know that there was a DPRK supporter who was a teacher at the school, and she should be sacked. What is that if not flagrant McCarthyism and a denial of the most basic democratic rights that this country claims to stand for? Okay, so I don't know, maybe we've fallen for McCarthyism. I don't think we should. As far as I'm concerned, if you call yourself an anti-imperialist, if you call yourself a socialist, if you call yourself a progressive, then it is your duty and your responsibility to stand with the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, which is the most demonized and most attacked state on this earth by imperialism. For one thing, they're actually attempting to build socialism, which is something a lot of us like to talk about from time to time. Oh, socialism, yeah, that sounds good. They're actually building it. Is it perfect? It's not perfect. Can anyone name for me an example of perfect socialism, this socialist utopia that's emerged from nowhere? Do we have that in Venezuela, for example? Do we have that in Cuba? Do we have that in China? Did we have that in the USSR? I don't know. If we did, maybe it would still exist. No, it's not perfect, but they're doing it. They're building it in extremely, extremely difficult circumstances to try and come from a semi-feudal society to build a whole new type of society, which is, no one even thought of building that type of society until a century ago. It's a new phenomenon, and to do it in a global context, which is incredibly, incredibly hostile and difficult, is something that we should applaud, and something that our instinct should be to defend it and to learn from it. Secondly, what country is under as much pressure as that country is, that has an occupying power, the most heavily armed state in the history of mankind, the United States, in the south of its island, with thousands of troops, which regularly flies nuclear-enabled aircraft over their airspace. Okay, they're under a very, very severe threat. They're subjected to an extremely harsh sanctions regime, which has been responsible for some pretty serious economic problems over the last 2 decades. They're subjected to a type of propaganda and demonization which is so crass and so ridiculous that I can't even believe that people pay any mind to it whatsoever. And it's so racist. You know, it takes a culture that people in the West do not understand. And instead of trying to explain that culture so that people have an understanding of it, they ridicule it. What is that if not shameless racism? Okay. Furthermore, it is a country that doesn't mind. Okay, we don't get enough support from you people, whatever. That doesn't stop us from standing with whoever around the world is engaged in a progressive or a socialist or an anti-imperialist project. DPRK stands with Zimbabwe, DPRK stands with Cuba, DPRK stands with Syria, DPRK stands with China. Okay, the DPRK sent troops and advisors to Zimbabwe to help ZANU-PF with the liberation struggle of that country. They sent pilots to help with the liberation of Vietnam during the Vietnamese War. And all of these countries that they have good relations with, be it Cuba or Venezuela or wherever, it's not controversial in those countries to reciprocate that support and to support DPRK back. But it's controversial here. I think if those countries can support and build solidarity with Korea, we can too. The people of Korea are standing up and fighting against imperialism and racism, just as the people of Ferguson are standing up and fighting against imperialism and against racism. Both deserve our full solidarity. Both deserve our full support. And with that, I'm opening them up.